This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It's wonderful seeing everybody here, and especially our visitor. It's good having you back with us. We are continuing our study that we started last week on two episodes or two issues of popular mechanics. We'll finish the first episode or the first issue, which was December 1996, and then we'll go into in 2 weeks the second issue. And it is talking about how science has solved the ancient mysteries of the Bible. Last week we started this, and we're going to finish this one today. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but I was able to kind of imitate the color scheme in my background. So anyway, last week we covered the first 2 pages dealing with Noah and the ark, Lot's wife, and Moses parting the Red Sea. And I want to go back real quickly to Moses crossing the Red Sea. Thank you, Brent, for sending me that video. I had seen this video on YouTube. It came out actually the Friday before this Sunday that I preached this. And I had just seen the picture, and it was showing a bird's eye view of the floor of the Red Sea, and you could see all these little blobs, and it was talking about how scientists have found, or divers have found, this crossing, and they have found the Egyptian army down in the bottom of the Red Sea. And I just kind of went over it, but Brent saw it and he sent it to me, so I went back this past week and looked at it. And I want to show one picture of that, but I want to make one correction. I had stated in my diagram here showing the depths. When I looked at it, it shows here that it was in kilometers, talking about the lengths and the widths. So I figured my scale over here would be in meters for the depths. And it was showing for this green section here being from 600 to 800 feet or meters deep, which I interpreted to be meters. And so I said it was 2,000 to 2,600 feet deep, which would have been a half a mile. But in his article or this video, they said it was only 900 feet deep. And so I went back, and so now I'm going to make a correction that this wasn't a half a mile deep, but according to this, it was 800 to 900 feet deep, not the half mile. It was still deep enough to drown Pharaoh's army, okay, compared to what they were saying it was up here in the marshes. The other thing I wanted to point out in that video, there was an archaeologist by the name of Ryan Watt back in the 70s who spent his whole life trying to show the biblical truth through archaeologist finds. And one of the biggest things that he found was that this was the crossing area of the Israelites. And you can't really see it in that picture, but if you look here where he's talking about, you can just see a little yellow line that comes through, and that is the only crossing in that dark mountain range where the Israelites could have gone. And then when you look here, this is a big beach. That sandy area right there is a big beach that the Israelites could have camped on, as we read last week, and then crossed. Well, he used what was available back in the 70s to explore the Red Sea, and he found some artifacts. Well, this group that this video was about went last year and got $10 million of private funding and got all kind of rovers and deep sea things and everything, and went down, and they found actually bones, human bones and horse bones. They found chariot wheels, which you can see here are 6 spokes, and that was what they had in Pharaoh's time was 6-spoke chariot wheels. And they've also found artifacts down at this 900-foot depth to prove Ryan Watt's explanation and idea that that was where the Pharaoh's army was wiped out at, where Moses had crossed through with the Israelites. And so I found that very interesting, that this came out same time that I preached a lesson on it, to prove through archaeology finds. Now, the one thing that they did say at the ending of this video was that they found scratch marks across that area when there were no artifacts. And they didn't know if it was from fishermen dragging the bottom with their nets, or if it was from people trying to get rid of the artifacts so that they could not prove that these artifacts prove the Bible story of Moses crossing the Red Sea. But I just found that interesting. So let's go on with today's lessons. We've got several things that we're going to look at, and these are the last 2 pages of that article. We're going to look at raising Lazarus from the dead, the plague of locusts, the star of Bethlehem, the shroud of Turin, which you probably don't know what that is. Some of you might. We'll look at it just very briefly, and then Moses and the burning bush. So let's get started looking at Lazarus in John 11, starting in verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sister sent to Jesus, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard this, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. And you might be looking at that, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, Lazarus dies. How could Jesus say that it does not lead to death? Yes, it is going to lead to Lazarus' death, but that needs to happen so that Jesus can be glorified through it. But it is not a lasting death. It's only going to be, as we read, a 4-day death. Okay? But this has to happen. Verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Again, this had to happen for his glory. He had something to prove, but Lazarus had to die. Now, verses 7 through 10, Jesus tells his disciples that they were going to go back to Judea, and they tell him not to because the Jews wanted to, they tried to stone him the last time he was there. But Jesus said, this is what I have to do. So, going down to verse 11. After saying these things, Jesus said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Now, you know that in the Bible, when they talk about somebody has fallen asleep, they mean that he has died. It's just a nice way of saying it. He has fallen asleep. So that's what the disciples are hearing, that he's fallen asleep. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has just fallen asleep, he will recover. Again, the disciples don't get it. Okay? Verse 13, now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant that he was just taking a rest. He was resting sleep. Then Jesus told them, hey, Lazarus is dead. Okay? He's not fallen asleep. Then Jesus told them that Lazarus had died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Jumping down to verse 16. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. This Thomas is the one that people call Doubting Thomas, the one that wanted to see, and touch his hands and his feet and his side to verify that Jesus had been risen from the dead. And this is a Thomas here that's saying, look, if we're going back to Judea and Jesus is going to get stoned, let's go with him so that we can die with him. Okay? So that's the reason when I talked about Thomas before, I don't think the doubting portion fits Thomas, because we see him here wanting to die with Jesus. Dropping down to verse 40. Jesus has several conversations with Mary and Martha in verses 18 to 39, but we're going to pick up the story here in verse 40. Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. He's been dead for 4 days. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When Jesus had said these things, he cried in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Remember those underlined statements. We're going to come back to these. The man who had died came out. His hands and his feet were bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Going back to the article about this story, a doctor of biblical history and archaeologist, and I'm not going to give his name or where he studied, states that it is possible that Lazarus was either in a coma or a catatonic state. Okay? Remember, last week I talked about how I think the devil is involved in this article. And he is trying to get people to not believe the biblical truth. And he is doing what he can to get people to doubt the truth of the Bible, the truth of these stories. And it comes down to, again, like we looked at last week, Hebrews 11:1, about what faith is. And it is our believing in the unseen, and that's what we have to do. We have to believe these stories are true. And remember, the cover of this article states, that science is proving these stories are wrong. And I have to not laugh at their ideas of what that proof is. So this doctor here is saying that Lazarus was not dead. He was just in a coma or a catatonic state. Going on, he goes on to state that the practice of medicine during the first century was crude, to say the least, even as recent as the Victorian era, to ensure that no one suffering from catatonia would be buried alive. People were buried in a special type of coffin that had tubes running up to the ground, and there was a bell with a string on it, so that if the person woke up in the coffin and he was alive days later, he could ring that bell to tell people, in this empty cemetery, "Hey, I'm still alive. I'm still alive. Get me out." So that was an issue back then. And so this doctor is saying, well, that is probably what happened back in this story of Lazarus. He was not dead. He was just in a coma or in a catatonic state. He goes on to state that a person in a catatonic state shows few signs of a heartbeat or breathing. And that's true. But I would think after 4 days, and he's just in a coma or catatonic state, he's still going to have some warmth. He's still going to have some moving. He's not going to be stinking or rigid from death. So there is a difference. The biblical account leads him to suspect Lazarus was actually in a coma, since in this condition, hearing is often the last sense that is lost. Assuming Jesus had a loud voice, Jesus cried in a loud voice, and he called out, "Lazarus, Lazarus, come out." Lazarus may have heard Jesus and came out of the coma. That's how science is disproving, quote unquote, this story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. That he was just in a coma. He wasn't dead. And Jesus screaming at him to wake up, woke him up. And that's how they prove that story is wrong. I don't think they did. Moving on to the next story. We're going to go back to Moses and what led to them crossing the Red Sea. I'm going to give you homework again. From Exodus, the story starts in Exodus 7 and goes all the way through 12. So you need to read 7 to 12, Exodus, the chapters, not the verses, the chapters, to look at all of the plagues that we're going to talk about, where we're going to look at one. But this is what led up to them fleeing Egypt. The first plague, there's 10 plagues. The first plague was Moses turned water to blood. And it was all the rivers, all the canals, and all the ponds he turned to blood. The second one was frogs. The third plague was gnats. And I did not remember the third plague being gnats. I thought it was flies. And I thought that was just the version I was using, gnats. So in my notes, I said frogs/gnats. And then when I looked at the scriptures and it said the fourth one was flies, it's like, okay, I was wrong. There was gnats. And so I had to scratch that. So I don't know if you remember it or not, but the third one was gnats. The fourth one plague was flies. The fifth plague was all the livestock died. The sixth plague was boils. I don't know if you've ever had boils. I had them when I was a young teenager. I used to get them in the crease of my right leg and on my neck. And I had to go in and have the doctor lance them. And then he looked at me one day and he said, okay, you won't have any more. And I never did. But they were very painful. And I can't imagine them being all over your body. The seventh plague was hail. Remember that. We're going to come back to that. And then the eighth one was locusts. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. The ninth one was darkness. And the 10th plague was death of the firstborn of not only the people, but also the animals. So we're going to go to Exodus 10. I'm sorry, go back one. Starting in verse 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, so that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every plant in the land, all that the hail has left. So remember, the hail came as number 7, and destroyed all the plants, knocked them down or whatever. And so now number 7, the locusts are going to come in and eat everything that the hail has left. Verse 13, so Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. Remind you of anything that we looked at last week? When the children of Israel were sitting on the banks of the Red Sea. Remember, he had divided them from the Pharaoh's army with a cloud of fire to separate them. And then all night long, God caused an east wind to blow all night to separate the waters of the Red Sea. And now here we see again that God had brought in an east wind all day and all night. Okay, so we see this correlation between the two. And when it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts. So the east wind blowing all night is bringing all the locusts from the east. Verse 14, the locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Egypt. Not just where Pharaoh was at, but the whole country is covered in locusts. And such a dense swarm of locusts as had never been seen before, nor ever will be again. Meaning, it wasn't just a swarm of locusts that had blown in from the east and settled, wherever Pharaoh was at, and they ate everything. No, it was covering the whole country. Like has never been seen before and never will be again. Verse 15, they covered the face of the whole land so that the land was darkened, and they ate all the plants, everything that's green, over all of Egypt. They ate all the plants in the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Locusts are a leaf-eating bug, okay? That's what they do, is they come in and just they just annihilate an area of all the green. But it wasn't just the greenery, the plants, they also ate the fruit that the hail had dropped to the ground. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field through the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh hastily called Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore forgive my sin. Please, only this once, and plead with the Lord your God, only to remove this death from me. Let's go back to the article. Locusts in Africa and Asia have been a problem throughout history. Even today, after unseasonable rains, hundreds of millions of locusts can appear practically overnight, eating everything green in their path. The green, not the fruit. Okay? And if you notice, they said after unseasonable rains. What was the plague before this? The hail. The article. This is consistent with the order of the plagues in the Bible. The locusts followed unseasonable rain that fell in the form of hail in the seventh plague. So you see how the devil is working, trying to make it sound, believable. Well, normally when there's an unseasonable rain, the locusts will come in and they'll eat everything that's green. Well, and that's what happened here with the plagues. Unseasonable rain came in as hail, and then all the locusts came in, which is normal. There remains, however, this mystery. So here they are trying to solve all the mysteries of the Bible, but yet they've come up with their own mystery. Most of the plagues, the 10 plagues, were produced at Moses' command. Duh. Yeah, because it's not scientific, it's God. The plagues, the 10 plagues, were given by God to Pharaoh to let his people go. You can't disprove it with science, and they couldn't even. They said, well, most of the plagues were produced at Moses' command. We can't say anything about that. Yeah, because it's the truth. Verse 18, so he went out from Pharaoh and pleaded with the Lord, and the Lord turned the wind into a strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go. Okay? So, Moses prayed to God. God had a west wind come in, blow all the locusts into the Red Sea, and killed them so that none were left in Egypt. The next story is the Star of Bethlehem, which we're familiar with that, and we'll look at the scripture here in a minute. Now, their excuse for this, their solving of the mystery, it wasn't a star from God. In other words, it was what they call here as a conjunction. And if you remember the picture comes from that article. And what they're saying is that in September of 6 BC, there was what is called a conjunction, where Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars came within close proximity of each other, which would cause what would appear to be a bright star. Also in China, astronomers in March and April of 5 BC witnessed a nova, a new star that lasted 70 days. This nova or new star appeared in the east for several hours before sunrise. And of course, they don't have any exact dates because the Bible does not give us an exact date or time of year when Jesus was born. And so they're using that to, a year difference between 5 and 6 BC. There are these two astronomical, things that occurred in the sky that could explain what the wise men saw. Now, my problem with it, and I'm not an astronomer, but my family and I have looked to the stars for years. Crystal, our middle daughter, actually has a big telescope that we go out in the plains and look at planets and things. And we go out all the time when there's, the aurora borealis or asteroids and things like that to see. And so I'm familiar with it to a degree. And that's east, this is west. And so if you have the planets or whatever coming up from the east, it's kind of hard, as we're going to look in the next verse, the wise men came from the east, so they're in that direction. The planets are coming up from that direction. It's kind of hard to follow them when they're that way, or if they appeared here and you try to follow them, you end up with a problem, especially with this nova that appeared, because it was, just above, according to this article, just above the sunrise at morning, which is going to be that way, and it's kind of hard to follow it. And it was only visible for a few hours, which means it had to be at night or first thing in the morning. It's kind of hard to follow it at night if it's not coming up till just before sunrise, and you can't follow it during the day because, as you know, the sun outshines anything in the sky, so you don't see anything except for the moon when the sun shines on it. So you can't use either one of these for a daytime light. So it had to have been at night, which is kind of hard to follow things at night. So let's look at what the Bible says. Matthew 2, verses 1 and 2. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men came from the east, came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and came to worship him. Okay, it doesn't say it was daytime or nighttime when they saw it, but they saw it rise and they followed it. So if it was during the daytime, it had to be a very bright star that God put there for a purpose. Verse 9, after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So it kind of gives the idea, if they had just come from the king, that was maybe during the daytime. And they go out and they see the star again, and they follow it. But what happens when the star gets over where Jesus is at? It stands still. That's not normal. The earth doesn't stand still, otherwise we'd all float off. Okay? But if it's a God-given star for these wise men to follow, he can make it glow during the daytime, and he can make it stop when he needs it to. Again, we as Christians have to believe the Bible. We have to believe what the Bible tells us. But Satan is going to do everything he can to get people to not believe the Bible, to believe that these stories are just fables. They're make-believe. They're made up, But if one story is wrong, then they all have to be wrong. And we have seen through the last week and this week, that their proof is not proof, but just a hypothesis trying to get people to not believe what is true. The next one, the Shroud of Turin, you probably have not heard of it. It's not something that is in the scriptures per se. The only thing that is mentioned here in the bottom corner, Matthew 27 verses 59 and 60, and Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb. So that's where the word shroud comes from. Turin is the city in Italy where this shroud is stored. They have an actual museum, which we'll look at the pictures in the next slide, and where the shroud is wrapped up and stored in a cathedral or church or something, and they only bring it out on special occasions. But this shroud is supposedly what Jesus was wrapped in, and whenever he came out of the tomb, whenever he was raised, that he left an imprint on this shroud. And they claim that it was when you look at the pictures, and it's hard, you can see it better on this last one, it is more of a negative image than it is a positive image. When they're saying, well, when Christ came through it, he left a negative image on this shroud, which people back in the time would not have known that to fake it, okay? And the shroud is laid out. It's 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, so it was folded either at his head, and that when he came through it, he left an imprint. And you can just barely see it on the top front. That's a picture of the actual shroud. The bottom picture is kind of like an x-ray or something of it, where you can see a picture or a figure or whatever of a man, and that's where they claim, is Jesus. Now, going back to the article, it says numerous studies have been performed on the shroud itself. In fact, it may be the world's most studied religious artifact. The most reliable studies of this shroud dates the shroud to around the 11th or 12th centuries, more than 1,000 years after Jesus Christ lived and died. Skeptics contend that the Shroud of Turin is an artfully produced forgery intentionally created to have the appearance of a burial cloth from the era of Christ. And they have done the carbon 14 or whatever dating on the cloth. And again, it puts it, thousands of years past Christ. And so what scientists are saying is that this holy relic is fake, which I have no problems with, because there's nothing in the scriptures, that talks about this, except for he was wrapped in a shroud. He was wrapped in a linen. And so now, if this is a false artifact, I'm fine with that, because again, having faith, I don't need to be able to see and touch something to prove my faith. But again, the devil's going to use something like this to prove otherwise. And then our last story this morning comes from Exodus 3, starting in verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. Okay, so Moses is up here tending his flock, and now all of a sudden this bush has caught fire. The angel of the Lord is there, and Moses is going to turn to see this bush. So I'm assuming this bush was not on fire ahead of time. It just all of a sudden, if I can use the term, ignited. And I say that, and we'll get back to it in a minute. Verse 4, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Let's go back to the article. It wasn't actually an article, it was just these three pictures quoting the scripture that we just read. The article states the biblical lands, and that's what's written down here in the bottom, the biblical lands sit atop a sea of gas and oil. Some suspect that Moses saw a natural gas seep that was ignited by lightning. So you can see here this gas, natural gas, seeps up and gets hit by lightning that ignites this natural gas. And just so happened, it's perfectly behind this bush. And where Moses is at, when he looks at it, it looks like the bush is on fire. Now, what I see problems with that is that Moses has to be perfectly in front of that bush, so the flames behind it make it look like this bush is burning. Because if he's standing off to the side, he's going to see that it's separated. But like we just read, he had been up there tending this flock all the time. So if this flame had been burning for a while, don't you think he would have noticed that and gone over there to see what it was? But if he just happened to be in the perfect location, then there had to be a strike of lightning to light that gas, which I don't know if you've ever seen. I've seen them out in the woods, places where lightning hit, it blows everything away. And it probably would have destroyed that bush if it was that close to where he could not see the difference. You see where I'm going? It's kind of hard to say, oh, that bush is on fire, but it's not on fire. But not see the flame behind it, but think that bush is on fire. I just get confused trying to explain it, in a logical way that they're saying that it happened. And I'm going to call that debunked, because you have to, and it's not like, oh, Moses goes around, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, that's a fire behind the bush. No, he sees it's a burning bush, which means it's a burning bush, but the bush is not getting consumed because God is there. Again, hey, I'm a powerful God because this bush is on fire, but it's not being consumed. And we as Christians can understand that again, as God is proving who he is, to Moses. So today we've looked at how, they claim that Lazarus was raised from the dead only because he was in a coma, which of course we don't believe. The plagues of locusts just happened to come in behind a hailstorm, but then they just said that, it's kind of can't explain how it happened. All these plagues happened when Moses said them. The Star of Bethlehem, just it's not three planets in alignment. The Shroud of Turin doesn't even count. And then, of course, Moses and the burning bush. I'm off next week because it's the fifth Sunday. So in 2 weeks, we will look at the December 2001 article on Science Proves More. Ancient mysteries of the Bible are false. We'll look at Jonah and the whale, manna from heaven, the dial of Ahaz, Jericho falls, and the miracle of the fish. So we will look at those in 2 weeks. I'm assuming it'll be 2 weeks that we'll look at those that we can cover them all. If there's any way that we can help you, if you have any confusion on the authenticity of the scriptures, we'd be happy to sit down with you and to discuss this and show how science in their... I'm not saying that science is wrong, because science has done a lot of things for society. It has given us medicines and helped us with a lot of things. But I don't think that they have solved any of the mysteries of the Bible. Okay? And I hope you see that as well. But if there's any way that we can help you in your walk in Christ, let us know. Let us pray for you. Let us encourage you. Let us help you, in your walk. That's what we as Christians are supposed to do for each other. Please let your wishes be known as together we stand and sing.